Last week, my stepdad, Carl, sold the old farmhouse I grew up in while I was out of town on a job. I'd been hauling lumber up in Minnesota, just a regular gig, nothing fancy. He didn't even blink when I got back, just shrugged and said, "You don't need that place no more, Jake." My mom, Linda, she didn't say a word, just sat there looking at the floor. Me? I gave a little grin, fired off one email I'd been holding on to, and walked out. 3 days later, Carl was blowing up my phone, practically begging. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, still trying to wrap my head around it all. Let me give you some backstory. My dad, Tom, passed away 6 years back. That farmhouse, a beat-up two-story with a wraparound porch and a barn out back, was his pride and joy. He left it to me and Mom in his will, split right down the middle. It wasn't some mansion, just a cozy place with creaky floors and a big barn where Dad kept his tractor and tools. That barn was my kingdom growing up. I'd spend Saturdays out there with him, learning how to fix engines or build a decent fence. Mom got hitched to Carl about 4 years ago. He's the kind of guy who's always talking about moving up in the world, whatever that means. Our place wasn't in some ritzy part of town. It's a quiet, working-class stretch of land where folks have been raising families and crops for years. Old man Jenkins down the road still uses Dad's socket wrench set I gave him after the funeral. Miss Ellie from across the way brings us her homemade peach jam every summer, has since I was a kid. Since Dad died, I've been covering half the taxes and upkeep on the farmhouse. It wasn't a fortune, but it kept the lights on and the roof patched. I drive out weekends to mow the grass, tinker in the barn, or just sit with Mom on the porch swing. My brother, Nate, he'd tag along when he wasn't buried in his mechanic school books. Last week, I was up in Minnesota for work. I've been texting Mom like always, but her replies were quick, distracted. I figured she was busy with her quilting group or something. Then I got home yesterday, rolled up the dirt drive, and saw a sold sign staked in the front yard. A pickup truck was parked by the barn, and some guy I didn't know was loading Dad's old toolbox into the bed. I walked inside, keys still jingling in my hand, and it was like the world flipped upside down. Carl was strutting around, pointing out the wood stove to a couple in fancy coats, like he was some small-town real estate king. Mom was perched at the kitchen counter, staring at a glass of iced tea like it was going to solve everything. "Hey, Jake," Carl said, all casual, like I just popped in for a beer. "Didn't think you'd be back this early. We're just finishing up with the new owners." I froze. New owners? He shrugged again, that smug little shrug he does. "Got a solid offer. Market's booming. You've got your own spot now, right? You don't need this old dump." My own spot is a cramped trailer 10 miles away. I've been saving every dime to buy Mom out of her share someday, something I told them both a dozen times. I glanced at Mom, but she wouldn't look up. "The barn stuff?" I asked, voice tight. Carl waved a hand. "Already gave it to a buddy who flips junk. Good riddance, right? That barn had Dad's whole life in it, his wrenches, his welder, the tractor he rebuilt from scratch, the stool where he'd sit and show me how to tighten a bolt just right. Gone." I walked out back to check. The barn was empty, nothing but dirt and a few stray nails. Dad's old CB radio was still there, shoved in a corner, probably too busted for Carl's buddy to bother with. I grabbed it, tucked it under my arm, and headed back inside. Mom finally spoke up as I passed through the kitchen. "Jake, honey," she started, but I cut her off. "It's all right," I said, and weirdly, I meant it. Something clicked right then, like a gear locking into place. I smiled, actually smiled, and kept walking. Out in the driveway, I pulled out my phone and sent that email I'd been sitting on for months. Didn't even glance back to see if they were watching. Nate called me an hour later, voice all fired up. "Tell me you're gonna fix this, Jake." "Already handled," I said, plugging Dad's CB into the wall of my trailer. "Just wait." Carl's been calling nonstop since this morning, leaving messages that sound more panicked every time. Mom texted once, asking what the email was about. I haven't answered yet. They don't know what's coming. More to tell you soon. It's been 2 days since I walked out of that farmhouse with Dad's old CB radio under my arm, and things have been moving fast. I woke up this morning to 16 missed calls from Carl, 16. His voicemail started cocky, then got shaky, and by the last one, he sounded like a guy who'd just seen a ghost. Mom's been texting too, mostly stuff like, "Jake, we need to talk," and "What's going on?" I've been sipping my coffee, letting them stew for a bit. See, that email I sent? It wasn't some big courtroom drama move. It was to my buddy Rick, who's been our family's go-to guy for legal stuff since Dad's will got sorted. I'd been keeping a paper trail, every tax bill I paid, every repair I covered, every dime I put into that farmhouse over the last 6 years. Rick's got it all now, and Carl's about to find out what that means. So, yesterday around noon, Carl showed up at my trailer. I saw him through the window, pacing back and forth in the gravel lot, tugging at his ball cap like he does when he's rattled. I let him sweat it out for a good 15 minutes before I opened the door. He didn't even wait for me to say hi. "The sale stuck, Jake," he barked, like it was my fault. "Title company called, said there's a snag with the paperwork." I leaned against the doorframe, sipping my coffee. "That's so?" He glared at me, eyes all wild. "Cut the crap. What did you do?" I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a picture of the deed, me and Mom's names right there, joint owners, plain as day. "You can't sell what ain't all yours, Carl," I said. "That's basic stuff. Thought you'd know that. Being Mr. Big Shot and all. His face went from tomato red to pale real quick. He started hollering about how I was tanking his plans, how he'd already promised the cash to some hotshot buyer, how they were gonna back out and leave him high and dry. I just stood there, scrolling through my weather app while he yelled. Finally, he ran out of steam and sucked in a big breath. You finished? I asked. 'Cause we ought to talk about that barn stuff you gave away. That was mine too, you know. Right then, Mom called. I put her on speaker so Carl could hear. Jake, please, she said, voice all wobbly. Come over tonight. Let's sort this out. Carl jumped in. Your mom's real upset, Jake. You want that on your conscience? I grinned. Dinner sounds perfect. Let's make it a family thing. Nate too. 6 o'clock. Mom sounded relieved, like she thought I was caving. Carl squinted at me, suspicious. Good. He should be. I spent the afternoon messing with Dad's CB radio in my trailer's little kitchen. Took some fiddling, but I got it crackling to life, still had that fuzzy hum Dad could never quite tune out. It felt like he was there with me, listening in while I got ready for dinner. 6 o'clock hit, and I showed up at the farmhouse with a 6-pack of Mom's favorite root beer and Dad's old fishing tackle box, the one he kept his best lures in. Nate was already there, sprawled on the couch, texting like his life depended on it. He looked up when I walked in and smirked, trying to hide it. Dinner was Mom's chicken and dumplings, her go-to when she's trying to smooth things over. We ate quiet-like for a while, forks clinking against plates, tension hanging heavy in the air. Then Carl cleared his throat, putting on his let's be reasonable voice. Look, Jake, we can work out a deal for your half. Some cash, maybe. I took a swig of root beer and set the bottle down slow. How's the real estate game treating you these days, Carl? He blinked, thrown off. What? Must be rough, I said, market jumping all over, lots of folks trying to cash in. I took a bite of dumpling. Bet that sale money was gonna be a real lifeline for you. His fork hit the plate hard enough to chip it. Mom stopped eating. Nate pretended to check his phone, but I saw his grin. What are you getting at? Carl's voice had a bite now. I pulled out a folder from my jacket, started spreading papers across the table, tax receipts, repair invoices, bank records showing 6 years of me keeping that farmhouse alive. Then I tossed in a couple emails I dug up from Carl's old business partner, griping about how Carl's been dropping the ball lately. You had no right, he started, voice rising, but Nate cut in. Keep it down, man. Old man Jenkins might hear you through the wall. That shut him up fast. The neighbors, same ones who've known us forever, same ones who've been whispering about Carl's shady deal, they're part of this too. Mom finally piped up. Jake, what are you up to? I stood, grabbed my jacket. Dad always said, fix it right the first time, or don't bother. I've been fixing this place for years. Time to finish the job. As I headed for the door, Carl's phone buzzed. Then mine. Then Nate's and Mom's. What did you do? Carl whispered, staring at his screen. Check your email, I said, stepping outside. The co-op board just called a meeting. More on that next time. The co-op board meeting got scheduled for 7 that night at the old grain hall down the road. I showed up early, leaning against my truck in the gravel lot, watching folks trickle in. Carl rolled up last, still glued to his phone, looking like he hadn't slept since dinner. The co-op's this little group that runs the farmland around our place, mostly old-timers like Miss Ellie and Old Man Jenkins, plus a few younger folks who stuck around to keep the fields going. Over the last 6 years, I've been quietly buying up chunks of land here and there, nothing huge, just some pasture lots and a couple small rentals that popped up when folks moved away. I kept it under a little company I set up, didn't make a fuss about it. Turns out, that made me the guy with the most say in the co-op. Funny how that works. The meeting kicked off with Miss Ellie banging a gavel. She's been chairing these things since Dad was a kid. Carl plopped down in the back, arms crossed, trying to look like he belonged. First up, Miss Ellie said, peering at her notepad, we've got the sale of the Turner farmhouse at 19, County Road. Any concerns? I stood up, hands in my pockets. Yeah, about that. I'd like to throw out some new rules for the co-op. Carl's head jerked up like a deer hearing a twig snap. You can't just, he started, but I kept going. Section 5, Paragraph 2, any sale that messes with the land's use has to get co-op approval. Those buyers planning to turn the barn into some fancy garage or something? Old Man Jenkins nodded slow. Heard they want to pave half the pasture too. Ain't right for this stretch. Carl shot to his feet, face turning purple. That's bull. You can't stop a sale over. Miss Ellie cut him off with a look that could freeze a river. Sit down, Carl, or we'll have a chat about that expired surveyor's license you've been dodging. Oh yeah, I've done some digging. Carl let his license lapse 6 months back, too busy chasing quick deals to renew it. Been working off the books since, which ain't exactly above board. He sank back into his chair, mouth shut tight. I stepped up to the front, hooked my phone to the projector, and pulled up a map of our corner of the county. Started pointing out the spots I'd picked up, little lots I'd fixed up, the hayfield we turned into a shared grazing patch last summer, the repair shop I'd been running for free out of the barn on weekends. This ain't just land, I said. It's where we live, where Dad put down roots. I ain't letting it get carved up for some city folks' weekend project. Miss Ellie's eyes twinkled. She's always had a soft spot for Dad. Jenkins grunted approval. Even the new guy, Tim, who moved in last year, looked like he was on board. My phone buzzed mid-sentence. Text from Nate. Mom's ready to talk. She's a mess, good mess though. I wrapped up quick. The co-op voted sales blocked, no question. Carl stormed out, kicking the doors so hard it rattled the windows. As folks headed out, Miss Ellie grabbed my sleeve. Your daddy be grinning ear to ear, Jake, she said, voice soft. He always said you had a head on your shoulders. I nodded, throat tight, and headed out. Found Mom and Nate at the diner on Route 12, same spot Dad used to take us for burgers after fishing trips. Mom's eyes were puffy, but she looked awake, alive even. Before I could sit, she blurted, I'm done with him, Jake. Should have left years ago. Nate smirked, flipping a sugar packet between his fingers. Took you long enough. She grabbed my hand across the table. The barn stuff, I stashed some of it. The good tools, the tractor parts. They're at Jenkins' place. I squeezed back. Knew you wouldn't let it all go. He told me yesterday. She laughed, then sniffled. I'm sorry, Jake. I got turned around somewhere. We'll get you back, I said. My phone started going nuts, Carl leaving ranting voicemails, the buyer's agent threatening to pull out, neighbors texting support. I shut it off. What's next? Nate asked, leaning back in the booth. I looked around. Same sticky tables, same buzzing neon sign, same burnt coffee smell Dad used to complain about but secretly loved. Some stuff don't need to change, I said. We start with the barn. Fix it up right. Mom wiped her eyes. The farmhouse, we still got a shot at keeping it? I pulled out my phone, showed them the company papers. You're both in on it now, 20% each. I've got 51 to keep the co-op in line. We decide together, like Dad would have done. Nate's jaw dropped. You put us in charge of all that? Family deal, I shrugged. Been planning it a while. That's when Carl burst in, hair all wild, eyes blazing. You think you're hot stuff, huh? I'll fight this. I stood up slow. You gonna tell a judge how you sold land you don't own? Or how you've been faking your license? Maybe explain those shady side deals you've been running. He froze, then crumpled like wet paper. Get out our town, I said quiet. You don't fit here. He slunk out. Mom chuckled, first real laugh I'd heard from her in forever. Nate joined in, and soon we were all cracking up, probably looking like lunatics to the waitress. She brought over a free milkshake, Dad's favorite, chocolate with extra whipped cream. On the house, she said. For Tom. More to come. It's been 3 days since that co-op meeting, and Carl didn't take losing lying down. This morning, I was out in my trailer's patchy yard, tinkering with Dad's CB radio, when I heard tires crunching gravel. Looked up and saw Carl's beat-up Chevy peeling in like he was auditioning for some action flick. He jumped out, face all twisted, and started yelling before his boots hit the ground. You think you've got me beat, Jake? I've got a trick up my sleeve. He was waving a crumpled stack of papers, looking like a guy who'd had too much coffee and not enough sleep. I set the radio down on my folding chair and crossed my arms. Morning to you too, Carl. He didn't even hear me, just kept ranting. Found a gap in your precious co-op rules. Section 9 says I can appeal to the county if I've got cause. I raised an eyebrow. That right? Well, I rewrote Section 9 last fall. Ain't no gaps left. His jaw dropped, but he shook it off and charged at me, papers flapping like a busted kite. I stepped aside easy, and he stumbled, nearly eating dirt right there in front of my trailer. A couple neighbors poked their heads out, Miss Ellie from her porch, Tim from his garage. Phones were already out, recording. Carl scrambled up, spitting gravel. This ain't over. I've got buddies at the county office. That's when Mom's voice cut through the air. She came marching up the drive from the farmhouse, Nate trailing behind her with a grin. You mean Phil at the county desk? She called. Spoke to his wife, Donna, last night. Told her all about your little stunts. Carl spun around, and I swear his face went from red to ash gray in 2 seconds flat. Donna's the county recorder, keeps all the land files straight, and makes a killer pecan pie for the harvest fair. Carl probably forgot she existed when he cooked up his scheme. You're done, Carl, Nate said, leaning against my truck. Might want to leave before this hits the internet worse than it already has. Tim waved his phone. Guess he'd been live streaming the whole thing. Carl made one last dumb move. He lunged at Mom, arms flailing like he was going to grab her or something. Didn't get close. Old man Jenkins, guy 70 if he's a day, used to wrestle hogs back in the 70s, stepped out from his yard and had Carl pinned in about 3 seconds. Carl yelped like a stepped-on pup, papers scattering everywhere. Miss Ellie's dog started barking, and half the street was laughing or filming by then. Sheriff's deputy rolled up just in time to see Carl squirming under Jenkins' knee. What's all this? Deputy Harris asked, scratching his head. Just Carl being Carl, I said. They hauled him off in the squad car, him hollering about lawsuits and payback the whole way. Looked like a clown show on wheels. After the dust settled, we got to work. Mom filed divorce papers by noon, said she felt 20 pounds lighter just signing them. Then the real magic happened. Neighbors started showing up at the farmhouse with stuff they'd been hiding for us. Miss Ellie had Dad's torque wrench stashed in her shed. Tim brought over the tractor carburetor he'd borrowed a while back. Jenkins rolled up with a wheelbarrow full of Dad's old pliers and hammers, said he'd kept them safe in his cellar. We spent all afternoon hauling it back to the barn. Kids were dragging extension cords, Nate was sorting bolts, and Miss Ellie's grandson showed up with a stack of pizzas. Tim's wife brought a tray of her cornbread, best I've ever had. Your dad would have been in his glory, Mom said, watching everybody pitch in. She was smiling, real and warm, like she used to when Dad was around. Then Nate hollered from the barn, "Jake, get over here." I jogged in and found him by the back wall, where the old feed bin used to sit. He'd pried off a loose board, and there was a metal box tucked inside, Dad's handwriting scratched on top, for the tough days. We popped it open. Inside was his notebook, pages full of doodles and plans for the farm, notes about the neighbors, the land, us. There was a letter too, dated a month before he passed. To my crew, it read, "A farm's more than dirt and a roof. It's the life you put into it, the folks you hold close. Look out for each other. Look out for this place. Never let some fool tell you what it's worth. Love, Dad. P.S. Jake, check the tractor seat. Left you a little something." I climbed up on the old John Deere, lifted the seat cushion, and found a hidey hole. There was Dad's favorite pocket knife, the one with the bone handle he'd carried since I was a kid, and a bundle of deeds. He'd been snapping up land too, way before I started. Guess it runs in the family. We sat there, me, Mom, and Nate, reading that letter over pizza, barn buzzing with neighbors around us. "He knew," Mom said, voice shaky but strong. "He always knew. More coming soon." It's been a week since Carl's big gravel lot meltdown, and things are finally starting to settle, well, as much as they can around here. After the sheriff hauled him off, the neighborhood turned into a full-on barn-raising party. We got Dad's tools back in place, the tractor humming again, and even strung up some old string lights he used to hang for summer barbecues. Mom's been floating around the farmhouse like she's waking up from a long nap, and Nate's been crashing on the couch, helping out between his mechanic shifts. Me? I've been splitting time between my trailer and the farm, trying to figure out what's next. Carl didn't vanish quiet-like, though. Yesterday morning, I was out in the barn, oiling up Dad's pocket knife, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rick, my lawyer buddy. Carl's filing a claim. Says he's got rights to the sale money. Dumb move, call me. I chuckled, dialed Rick, and put him on speaker while I tightened a loose bolt on the tractor. "What's he cooking up now?" I asked. Rick laughed through the line. "He's claiming he put sweat equity into the farmhouse, says that gives him a cut. Problem is, he's got no proof, and you've got 6 years of receipts saying otherwise. Plus, that expired license? County's looking into it. He's digging his own grave." I grinned, wiping grease off my hands. Let him dig. What's our play? Rick got that serious tone he uses when he's about to drop a hammer. We counter with the deed and your records. Show he had no right to sell. Might even get him fined for working without a license. You want me to push it? Yeah, I said. Push hard. Dad didn't build this place for some clown to cash it out. Rick promised to file by noon, and I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in days. That afternoon, Mom called me into the kitchen. She'd been digging through Dad's old filing cabinet, the rickety one he kept in the mudroom, and found something. "Look at this, Jake," she said, sliding a yellowed envelope across the table. It was in Dad's blocky handwriting, for Linda, Jake, and Nate future stuff. Inside was a stack of savings bonds, dated 10 years back, and a note. "Hey, gang," it read. "Put this towards something good, fix the barn, plant a field, whatever keeps the place alive. You're tougher than you know. Love, Dad." Mom's eyes got misty. He must have cashed these in secret, probably why we never missed the money. Nate peeked over her shoulder. "How much we talking?" I did the math, about 15 grand with interest. Enough to do some real work around here. We decided right then to turn the barn into something more. Been tossing around the idea of a fix-it shop, free repairs for neighbors, maybe some classes for the kids on how to weld or rebuild an engine. Nate's all in, says he'll teach when he's not at the garage. Mom wants to start a vegetable patch out front, big enough to share with folks down the road. "Your dad would have loved feeding everybody," she said, smiling soft. I pulled out the company papers again. "You two still got your 20% each. We'll vote on it, family style." Nate smirked. "I vote yes, long as I don't have to weed the garden." Mom swatted him with a dish towel, and we all laughed. First time in forever it felt easy. Then the doorbell rang. It was Miss Ellie, holding a pie tin and a grin. "Heard about Carl's latest stunt," she said, stepping inside. "Figured you could use some apple pie to celebrate him tripping over himself." We sat her down, cut the pie, and she filled us in. Word spreading, Carl's been crashing at a buddy's hunting cabin 20 miles out, whining to anybody who'll listen. "Nobody's buying it," she said. Old man Jenkins told the feed store guy Carl's done for, reputation shot. I took a bite of pie, still warm, crust flaky as ever. "Good," I said. "Let him stew out there." By evening, the barn was shaping up. Tim and his wife stopped by with a spare workbench they'd been storing. Jenkins hauled over some lumber he'd had stacked in his shed, said Dad gave it to him years ago for a fence that never got built. We hammered and sawed till the sun dipped low, radio crackling Dad's old country tunes in the background. Nate found a box of Dad's fishing lures under a tarp. Guess somebody saved those too. "Think he's watching?" Nate asked, holding up a shiny spoon lure. "Yeah," I said, looking out at the fields turning gold. "And he's probably laughing at Carl." My phone buzzed again. Rick filed the counterclaim. "County's freezing the sale till it's sorted. Carl's toast." I nodded to myself. "Thanks, man. Keep me posted." Hung up and turned to Mom and Nate. "We're solid. Time to build something." Mom hugged me, tight and quick. "We already are," she said. "More to tell you later."